So hello everyone, good afternoon. For those who don't know me, my name is Brittany Rosario and I work at Bay State Health in the Office of Government and Community Relations. And we're super excited to present to you our second workshop of the week that we are hosting in partnership with Public Health Institute with some of our internal folks. Just to really continue building capacity in our region when it comes to grant writing, when it comes to learning about how to submit good proposals. As many of you know, Bay State right now is in its Better Together kind of grant period. Many of you probably have submitted proposals for this grant process, but we're excited to offer these workshops to everyone. So for those who are submitting applications, welcome. For those who are not, also welcome. We're just excited for you to be here as a learner and have you with us. So today's workshop is called Tips for Writing an Effective Grant Proposal. It will be done in two pieces. The first piece will be done by Kimothy Jones on technical writing do's and don'ts, and the second part by Elisa Einbinder, who I will introduce shortly. So Kimothy, if you could just flip to the next slide. Awesome. So for those, I'm sure you all are experienced in Zoom by now, but just please add your name to your video if you haven't already, just so we know who's in the room with us. Reminder to please keep your microphones muted throughout the presentation. Use the chat to introduce yourself to the group. Feel free to write your name, organization, where you're from, and also use the chat to ask questions. At the end, we will reserve some time for that, but if questions pop up, feel free to include them there. And just so everyone knows, this presentation is being recorded and slides will be offered and provided at the end. So don't worry about writing everything down right away. This will all be presented to you. Awesome, I see folks writing in the chat. So with that being said, I would like to introduce Kimothy Jones. Kimothy, show everyone your beautiful photo on the next slide. There you go. Kimothy is the program director for the Women's Health Network at Bay State. It's a grant that we currently have. And Kimothy also helped Bay State Health launch two grant writing workshop series that we had about last summer. We had two cohorts. So we're super excited to continue our partnership with you, Kimothy, in our office. And the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Brittany, and welcome everyone. It's nice to see so many people join this afternoon. We're going to get right into it. My presentation is relatively short. It has more to do with the do's and don'ts of grant writing and will help you as you develop your proposals. First, I just want to emphasize that even the most experienced grant writers experience angst, uncertainty, nervousness, anxiety, etc., when responding to a request for proposal. Some often are concerned that after they invest the time and effort that their proposal won't be funded. And that's okay, because as Wayne Gretzky said, you miss 100% of the shots you never take. So the following tips, do's and don'ts, hopefully will help you craft a clear and well-stated proposal. One of the very first things that everyone should do is print out the request for proposal guidelines and all of the attachments and read through it more than once. And especially follow the instructions. One way to make sure that you're following the instructions and highlighting very important information is to use a highlighter to circle due dates, to make sure you have a list of all of the attachments, underline important information. As an example, for Bay State Medical Center, the focus is on education. So you need to make sure that your proposal is geared towards education. You need to make sure that you're addressing some of the social determinants of health as listed in the request for proposal guidelines. You also need to be sure that your organization meets the eligibility requirements. So make sure that you pay particular attention to that. Also, at the onset, have a clear vision of the program you want to get funded and organize your proposal so it flows logically and is easy to read. I don't know who the reviewers will be for this particular grant process, but they may or may not know your organization. And so it's very important to have it well organized and make it easy to read and to follow. I always recommend making an outline. More do's. As you write, imagine the reader. Again, these are going to be the review team. And what is it that you want to tell this person about your organization? Why you're so passionate about your organization's mission and the need that your proposed program will have in the community that you serve. How it addresses some of the gaps that exist in your community. You should also write in a professional voice. What does that mean? Well, you need to cite data, and you also need to identify the source of that data. But you also need to use proper grammar, correct punctuation and spelling. Keep it sweet and simple. Avoid unnecessary jargon. Make sure that if you use acronyms, that you first spell it out, because again, people may not be familiar with certain acronyms throughout your grant proposal. If you have someone available within your organization, identify someone to review the proposal before it's submitted, and someone who hopefully can catch and maybe do some editing to make sure that you've done all of the above in terms of using proper grammar, the correct punctuation and spelling. It can be very confusing to people reading if they're just not sure what you're trying to express. And sometimes that can lower your score. And also allow yourself sufficient time and submit early if you can. Don't try to do everything yourself. Assemble a small team and assign tasks with completion dates. This is also known as a work plan for grants. Even in my former capacity at Bay State as the manager of ambulatory grants, I always pulled in a team of experts, particularly the medical doctors that may have been involved in the grant writing process, because I'm not a physician. They're the topic experts when it comes to certain things. And so I always had somebody on my team to do that, as well as assistant to try to help assemble everything, to pull it together. And everybody had their designated task. If it required letters of support, there was a person that specifically had that responsibility, for example. After we would, as a team, identify who do we want to get letters of support from. And Brittany will be able to answer some more questions about that. I'm not sure that this particular grant process requires letters of support, but it might require you to identify people that you plan to collaborate with in the community. Also, even though you're telling your story about your organization and your mission, don't write the way you talk. When we talk, most folks talk in a more colloquial way. Like I just said, folks, that's kind of colloquial as opposed to people or persons. So be mindful of that. Also, don't go over the specified page limit or the word count. I would say the majority of people today use computers to complete grant applications. So use all of your tools that your computer has. If you're on your home page, you can go up to spell check. There's word count. It will even show you how many characters you've written. So make sure you use that. Also, don't misspell words. Use the spell check function on your computer for that as well. You have to kind of know how to spell to correct spelling on computers sometimes, because a box might pop up after underlining the word in your actual document that you're writing, and it might offer you suggestions for what word to replace the misspelled word. So sometimes words sound alike, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that next. More don'ts. With that stated, don't confuse words that sound the same but are spelled differently. Again, to reiterate, the spell check function sometimes cannot discern the difference. Also, don't write incomplete or grammatically incorrect sentences, i.e. dangling participles. Use the grammar check function on your computer for that as well. It will make recommendations. It will even recommend that a comma should go somewhere as opposed to a period, or a semi-comma as opposed to a colon. I know this kind of sounds like English 101, but it's really important to write professionally when you're responding to a grant proposal. Don't make the proposal reviewers have to guess what you are trying to express. So let me talk a little bit about homophones. These are examples of words that are spelled differently but sound the same. I sat by the sea and watched the sunset. Oh, I see you over there. Then you have their, which is possessive. Their organization is X, Y, and Z. Look, it's over there. Or they are. The conjunction of they are, there. And they all sound alike. Here, as in my ear, and it's right here. Hare versus a rabbit, hare. Marry, as in proposal. I accept your proposal to marry versus I'm really happy. Merry Christmas. Or marry, a formal name. I accept your proposal, but with one rule, that must be an exception. So exception, shorten, accept. Accept in the case of, as opposed to I accept. Loan, loan. To, as in the number two. TOO, as in also, to, going to. You get the point. Where, site, site. So dangling participles. It's a phrase that doesn't have a subject inside a sentence. So this would be incorrect. Carrying a flashlight, the path was more visible. As worded, that means that the path was carrying a flashlight. To say it correctly, carrying a flashlight, I, who is the subject in this sentence, I could see the path. Similarly, a dangling modifier dangles because the word or words it's supposed to describe are not in the sentence. So incorrect would be jogging in the park, a dog bit me. The correct version would be while I was jogging in the park, a dog bit me. So again, missing words. In this case, it was the subject of who was jogging in the park and who actually got bitten by the dog. And that really wraps that up. Are there any questions?
Timothy, I would just like to add and let the group know that like you were saying, this may seem simple, or for some folks who be like, of course I wouldn't do this, but it makes such a big difference when all these tips are kept at the forefront. And I just want to echo your comment, Timothy, that for Bay State Health's current grant for RFP, there are readers who aren't even from certain regions that might be reading their proposal. So being clear, really detailing out who you are, who you serve, not assuming people know, oh yeah, the school up the street from us, like what is that school? And also just readability makes such a difference when reviewing grants, especially because folks are going to be reviewing a lot of grants, a lot of proposals. So I just want to echo and confirm how important these little tips are, Timothy. So thank you for reminding us.
You're very welcome.
Awesome. Any questions for Timothy, or if you don't feel like unmuting, you can also toss it in the chat.
Is it possible for you to show us the first 4 tips again? I'd like to take a screenshot for my notes.
Sure.
For that, adding the do's. Is it that one?
These, the do's and the don'ts?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yes, all of the above, actually.
Awesome. And so a reminder, feel free to screenshot it now, but a reminder, we will be sending these out this afternoon. So. Awesome. So thank you, Timothy. This is our first half. Any other questions?
I was going to go down. I think the person asked for the first 4, but are you satisfied knowing that you're going to get a copy of this PowerPoint later this afternoon?
That does make it easier.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Timothy. So we're not done. More to come. This is probably the part that a lot of folks are like, logic models. What is that? They're a sticky subject. I'm going to stop your screen quickly, Timothy, and allow Elisa to share her slides for the next portion of today's tips for writing an effective grant proposal. So perfect, Elisa, we see that there. So if folks do not know, Public Health Institute is a long-standing partner of Bay State, and today we have Elisa Einbinder with us. If you want to show your beautiful photo as well. There it is, who's a senior research associate at Public Health Institute. So Elisa, we're super excited to have you with us. Folks, stay tuned, because I'm sure these are even the more sticky topics that folks kind of want to ask questions about. So Elisa, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Timothy. That actually, I learned some new things, and also it feeds in actually really nicely to some other things I was going to emphasize at the end as well. So welcome, welcome, welcome. As said, I'm Elisa Einbinder from the Public Health Institute of Western Mass, and I've worked in the field of program evaluation for about 15 years, but I spent most of my career in these big, large-scale federal evaluations. So it was fascinating, but pretty disconnected from the daily workings of programs and the local context. So I'm super excited to be able, and that Bay State is enabling this to happen, because I think these types of capacity building workshops are a great way to further support our various communities' interests and abilities to improve our collective health outcomes. Let's see, just to give you a quick overview, I know it's a lot to try to cover right now, but I'm just going to explain the purpose of this part of the session and kind of contextualize it, provide a definition of a logic model, explain some general components of a logic model, provide what I hope is a little fun real world example that will contextualize it for you all, and then use the grant application itself as an example of how to think about and create a logic model. Hopefully there'll be enough time for that. If not, as Brittany said, these slides are going to be available, and I also have a handout that will be available as well. And then we want to have enough time for questions. Okay. Okay, so just putting us in context, this part of the workshop is around understanding the importance of how to visually communicate program and expected outcomes through a logic model. And I really wanted to point this out because just as Timothy said, when you're reading through, I know when I read through one of these applications, I look at the scoring criteria pretty quickly and start, making little notes and highlighting. So in that scoring criteria are a lot of things, but also that applicants have identified both short and long-term outcomes, and that the applicant has fully completed and submitted required attachments. And there's obviously the budget, the work plan, but also the logic model. So again, this is a really important component that's part of your attachments to that main proposal. I also, in terms of those short and long-term outcomes, believe that when you create your logic model, you're actually going to be even more secure and sure in identifying your short and long-term outcomes. Okay. So before we get into this definition, Brittany created a poll for me. I just wanted to get a sense of how many of you feel like you have experience working with creating logic models, or this is brand new for you, or you're not quite ready to say you're super experienced or you know nothing. I'm just going to give it a second for people to submit.
Elisa, are you seeing responses come in?
I'm not. I see the poll.
Let me try it again.
Okay. That's okay. Yeah.
Zoom. All right. Are folks now seeing that? If you could let me know either in the chat.
Let's see.
I've submitted mine twice.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So maybe we're
It's working. Great.
All right, we'll give it another few seconds so folks can write again. Okay.
Okay. Are you seeing the results, Brittany?
Let me see. I press share results. Are you seeing?
Yes, I'm seeing them. Great. Okay. Terrific. Thanks for being willing to play along with this little part of it. So we have approximately, let's say 37% of the group saying, yes, you have prior experience, about 48% saying no, and about 16% saying they're not sure. I'm glad we're all in the room together, because honestly, I don't know about for you, but I know I learn a lot from a teacher, but I also learn from my peers. So as I go through these slides, I might even try to call out and say, hey, if you can give a little example in the chat, or if you can provide a little more for those of you who have had experience, that would be great. And hopefully, even for those who have a lot of experience, there'll be something in here of use for you, and really, a different way of thinking about it that will also have some practical value. So here's a definition of a logic model. It's a definition. It's not the only one, but as it says here, it's a picture of how you believe your program, or it could be an initiative or a set of services, but how it will work. And in general, it uses words and sometimes symbols like arrows or things like that to describe a sequence of activities thought to bring about the change, which again are those short and long-term outcomes that we were just talking about. So other ways to think about it are, logic models can be seen as a way to connect what you are doing with what you're trying to achieve. A logic model can be seen as a roadmap A logic model can show how components of a program are interrelated. A logic model helps you think through if-then scenarios. So if we were able to do X thing, then what will we expect to achieve? So they're just a very useful tool, I guess, in any number of ways to really help you with the goals of your program and how to achieve those goals. And another really wonderful thing about logic models in general, and I hope that the people who are familiar with them would agree with this, is that they help you well beyond whatever grant you're applying for. They just help you kind of keep in mind, okay, wait, why are we doing this and what are we trying to do, and kind of keep your I don't know, yourself kind of with the focus on what you're trying to achieve. So they have utility beyond the scope of for a grant or writing a grant. Okay, so what do they look like? Well, I just Google searched logic models just to show you a random set, just so you can see. We're going to go through what Bay State is asking so that you're clear that's what the logic model template you're going to be using. But my point of this is just to say logic models, often there's a bit of creativity involved. They don't all follow the same formats. However, they tend to have these basic components, which are inputs, which we're going to go over definitions in a moment, activities, outputs, and outcomes. So in general, not always, but they have these components. And I wanted to also point out this sort of slew of different pictures of things by way of saying that sometimes you can actually like look up, I don't know, logic model and your particular program or intervention and find somebody who's done something. And it can be really helpful as a frame to help you kind of riff off that in terms of your own what you're trying to do. We would not want you to steal everything they're doing, but it's helpful to not have to reinvent the wheel. Let's see. Okay. So as mentioned, in general, logic models have these components, resources and inputs, which you can basically think of those as your building blocks. So what does your program already have that enables you to do the work you plan to do or are currently doing? As mentioned in the box, the resources could be in this box, sorry, down here, could be things like your human capital, right? Your staff, your organizational capital, financial, what kind of funding do you have for this? What kind of partners? There could be other things as well. Then we have activities, and hopefully this one is just immediately when you think of activities like, oh yeah, right, that's what we do, right, that's what we do. So those are basically, the action set of the program. That is the kinds of services you offer, or what you do in your day, the types of activities. So it could be everything from providing support services to cooking classes, education, case management, all those types of activities. Outputs are if you accomplish what you want to do, what are the sort of direct results of those activities? So those are often things like, okay, so if we offer this educational service, let's say, how many people are we going to serve? That's a direct result, right? We can count those up. What are the types of services they're going to receive? We can count that up. Okay, 20% receive this service, 80% receive this service. Then we have the outcomes. Outcomes are all about the intended benefits of your program, as it says here, what will change as a result of what you do? So if all goes according to your beautifully laid plans, what will happen to those whom you are serving? How will their experience be different? What might change as a result of your efforts? And then I have impact here. Often just the way grants work, there isn't necessarily time to show impact, because impact is really, just as the word suggests, that kind of long term goals, or what you aspire to make real change in, let's say, both the population you're trying to serve, but maybe even larger community wide change. So often it has a little bit of a sense of forecasting about it. And then we have these contextual factors, which are the surrounding situation that influences how or the extent which you're able to achieve your intended results. So I'm talking in this very generic way, but again, I'm about to present a kind of silly example, which I hope will be helpful to just kind of ground it in our everyday, life experiences, which is, okay, so let's just, for the sake of this example, let's pretend that we run a driver's ed school. Basically, that's our program. We're driver's ed instructors at Bay State Driver's School or something like that. Okay, so I'm just going to give you 5 seconds to imagine yourself as the head of this educational program to teach people how to drive. Just put yourself in the driver's seat. Okay. Okay. And I'm also just going to tell you that you've been doing it for over 10 years. You have a lot of experience at this. Okay. So what might be some of your resources that you have from the get-go in terms of running this program? If some people could maybe put something in the chat, what do you think, you will be bringing to the table in terms of this? A fleet of cars, great. Curriculum, great. Cars, yes, terrific. Personal experience, great. Instructors, great. Experienced staff, exactly. So, whoops, exactly. You're training as a driving instructor. You have a trained staff. You have a car with the right equipment, and a fleet of cars is great, because again, we have hybrids and we have other things. Community relations, great. I put in patience too. People don't always put those kinds of things in as inputs or resources, but I could imagine, to be a really effective driver's ed instructor, that would be something really important in there. Funding, ability, and experience serving a diverse group of people, right? You don't expect, as a driver's ed teacher, that everybody's coming in at the same level of knowledge, or that you're going to have, all, 15-year-olds, or, you might have people who learned how to drive in another country and now they're trying to figure out our rules. So you really need to have all that. Okay, I'm looking at the time. I'm gonna whip through the next thing. Okay, so then we're on activities. So, okay, I know this one is definitely not gonna be rocket science. What do you do as a driver's ed instructor? Let's just quickly think about that. Oh, good, people put in multilingual. Driving practice, exactly. Driving practice, videos, good, okay. I'm just gonna go through this one very quickly. You're gonna probably, if you think about it in the micro steps, you're gonna demonstrate how to start a car. You're gonna help people practice on how to start a car. You're going to demonstrate how to drive the car, and then you're going to let that student practice on how to drive the car. And this is great stuff around the stuff that's coming up around car safety, vehicle systems laws. Those are all things that are going to go into those activities. So I appreciate that people are using the chat. Then we go into these outputs, which again, a little bit of a no-brainer, right? What is the immediate result? Well, if you demonstrate how to start a car and that person practices that, then the learner should be able to start the car, right? You want to see that the learner can do this more than once. You want to see that the learner can drive the car down the road, right? These are direct results of what you're doing. Okay, now we're going to get into outcomes. Okay. So, what are you hoping the immediate results of your teaching will be? Well, I love these comments coming in. These are great. Yes, how to get gas is something I didn't even think of, but you're right. That's a really important one. But in terms of these outcomes, right, in terms of these larger picture items, we have things like the learner views him or herself or their self as a driver, right? That's an important, and that's a transition, right? Some of us, I feel like it's been a long time since I learned, but I vaguely remember it being a bit of time before I saw myself as a driver. You develop confidence, right? You have a skill set to adapt to new terrain. Okay, great. Yes, respect for the law and rules of the road, lessen fear of driving. These are all good things that you might really aspire to, right? Because one could imagine, for example, this lessen fear of driving reminds me, you could have some students who've had some traumatic experiences, either with accidents or other things that make them very fearful of driving. And so one outcome that totally makes sense is I want to lessen their fear of driving. So thank you for thinking of that. And then just in terms of impacts, I don't remember if I put impact. Yes. Okay. Right. We want to see, if we think about our larger, broader community in this, right? A couple, years down the road, whatever, we hope that we are such the most tremendous, Bay State has the most tremendous driving school like in existence, that we'll see in our, in our various counties in Western Mass, fewer accidents and greater public safety. I know a lot of you talked about that, like laws and rules of the road. So that's our sort of community impact that we're hoping for. So yeah, and here's the great thing too about our little driver's ed example, in terms of especially those outcomes. One of the reasons we're talking about this all is you want to be able to show the benefit of the work you do, right? And the driver's ed example is pretty simple because there's pretty concrete ways one could demonstrate that you have, for example, taught people how to drive, right? You could what do you call it, get results of their when they go to the DMV and see, did they pass on their first try? Or you could get let's just pretend a data set that looked at accidents and looked and compared your driving school to another driving school. So it's very concrete. I know some of you are working on programs and initiatives and things that it's a little harder to kind of like take that outcome and map it to something measurable. So try and think maybe back to this little driver's ed example as, okay, it can be something simple. I can actually be able, there are ways to be able to see that this change happened and measure it. And these are, self-reliance and agency in one's life. I love it. As actually, I would think of that as like an impact almost. This is great. Okay, so hopefully everybody feels kind of comfortable with these components. Now we're going to transition into talking about Bay State and this grant application itself and the logic model template. So this is page 1 of that logic model template. And I, again, in the chat, if people could just note what they see that looks familiar from the other components I was just talking about, because I know, again, you have to like adjust your eyes a little bit because logic models often have different things. So maybe if looking at this page, what do you see that looks familiar? And I'm just putting a little circle here to bring our eyes to it. What looks familiar from what we've been just talking about? Anyone want to put something in the chat? All right, I'm just gonna, in the interest of time, say we have inputs, our resources, we have activities, we have our short-term outcomes, we have our long-term outcomes. So here are 4 of the 5 components that I was talking about are very common in logic models. They're right here, 1, 2, 3, 4. There are some additional aspects, and again, these aren't atypical for logic models at all. There's the problem statement, the goal. Under activities, there's the priority population and or target audience, the potential methods of evaluation, and that is for both short-term outcomes and long-term outcomes. And I'm gonna, again, review this in a moment. But then on page 2, you see context and or conditions, which we did talk about very briefly, the context or conditions. I just want to say that, again, you saw some examples of different logic models, and maybe in your mind, you already have experience with logic models and have a kind of go-to template. Use the template that you were given by Bay State. Just as Kimothy was talking about, imagine you're the reader. Bay State provided this for you, and it makes it so much easier for the reader because they have this template, right? And they know everybody's going to be using this template. And so I can just look through and be able to read through the template. So I just kind of want to reinforce that, certainly when you're working on this and kind of, iterating on it, let's say, sure, maybe you want to use a slightly different model. But for this, please use what Bay State provided. Because you don't want to irritate your potential reviewers either. And so, and this is great. So then what did I want to say? Okay. So I have also given Brittany a, I guess I called it like a tips and recommendations sheet to provide for people afterwards. But in this PowerPoint, I also took our Bay State grant as it's written and thought of it as a program in and of itself to also give you an example of how to think about this template. Again, I realize I have to try to get through the next slides and we don't have time to really, focus in on all of this. But if you think about that grant application itself as a program, there was a problem statement, right? There, Bay State identified a problem. There are goals. There's a goal for this program. There are inputs, right? Which is the funding. That's an input. The social determinants of health framework, the team of application reviewers, right? These are the things that this grant program already has. And then these activities, right? They're offering these grants. There's technical assistance, which we're all participating in right now. There are short-term outcomes. In the grant application itself, it talks about this idea that they want to generate excitement and energy. There are long-term outcomes. As it says here, we want improved health status of our populations. We want to decrease serious health consequences, disease, and disability. And in terms of the priority populations, obviously, when you're doing this, you're going to pick what you're focusing on. But for Bay State, these are all the priority populations. So again, I just afterwards, hopefully we'll have a little time to talk a little bit more, or seeing this and having some time to reflect on it on your own will also be helpful. I also put in there all the context and conditions that are mentioned in the grant, in the hopes that also, just like Timothy was saying, when you have your like checklist of things, that it's helpful to just think through this checklist. Okay. And then finally, some recommendations for you in terms of this. Let's see, documents that may be helpful. Your mission statement, your values statement, even about our organization info can be really helpful. Reports you've written to past funders, or if you have a board in general, wow, you can just really extract a lot from that. Reports that you've provided to your communities, the proposal narrative, in terms of your work with others. Just like Timothy was saying, even if realistically you can only have one person work on this logic model component of the proposal, you really want to talk over that storyline with other members of the staff. And especially for a final version, I would strongly suggest that you run it by people who are in the front lines of providing whatever service or program or initiative you're explaining, because if it would probably be problematic if they could not understand what it was, right? so it's just kind of a way to make sure that it's I forget what they call that process, but so that's another suggestion, which relates to what Timothy suggested already. And then just a kind of reality check on logic models, right? It's a living document. The pandemic clearly has made us all too aware that situations and circumstances might unexpectedly change. A director might leave, the organization mission might shift. So just kind of keep in mind that a logic model works best as a living document, and it's meant to be a tool to help your work, to consider your program's goals, and help to keep you on target in meeting those goals. And that it, hopefully it won't be that thing that we just put together painfully for the proposal and we never want to see it again, right? Hopefully it'll be something that will be for a kind of beginning of usage of that type of way of thinking about your program. Yes, and then tips. Again, I have a handout which goes through this in more detail, but as Timothy said, use the guidelines of the grant to create the logic model. I mean, she talked about it in general, use the guidelines of the grant, and so I give an example, right? The grant states what the primary populations that you should pick to focus on. So pick your primary target population from this list and use that as the describer, right? I mean, you might have other cool ways of talking about your population, but use this as your primary way of talking about them. And then, as it says here, combine and summarize program elements, no more than 5 to 7. As you hopefully saw, even from those quickie models, there's not, generally, you don't want to have 30, 40 rows of information, right? It's just a broad summary picture. As I said here, think about the broad brushstrokes. In terms of ways to do it, there's all kinds of different ways to think about it. Some people like to start at the end, right? Hey, what are we trying to achieve here? And then go back to the beginning. Okay, yeah, what do we have to be able to achieve that? You know, there isn't like a right way. Just think it through for a little bit, or you might want to go back and forwards. It's you know, up to you. There are different ways to think about it. And then this, I like this, check assumptions and ask questions. You know, how do we make this happen? Why do we do this? If this, then what? So kind of asking those questions to yourself. And again, you're going to want to visually show how these activities and outcomes feed into each other. And I think, again, I will end it there by saying, again, in the handout, hopefully there's a few more tips and recommendations, and just a big, broad thank you for everybody. And I guess it's time for questions. Yeah.
I just wanted to add to Elisa, I put the handout in the chat. If some folks want to download it now, I'll also send it out with the slides and stuff. So if you miss it there, no worries. But there was a question that came in while you were speaking, so maybe we can start with this one. They're speaking about, the question was, would we cite studies as part of the logic model?
So I guess I would see that as something that would be part of your narrative in your proposal itself. And your logic model really is, because it's just these kind of bullet point summaries, to me, it wouldn't make sense, or I don't think I've seen that happen. You might see a reference on the bottom sometimes to, you know, so like, for example, the medical home model, right? There are logic models that are created just around programs that are around medical homes. And so, sure, you might use some of that information. So you credit, we used, you know, from the, you know, whatever, ASPE's website, the medical home model. But yeah, I think that's more for your proposal narrative.
Awesome. Great. And yes, from Bay State's end, that is not an expectation. So if that helps.
That's good to know. Yeah.
Another question is, what is the difference between a logic model and a theory of change? Can the principles and tips you shared today be helpful for developing theories of change as well?
That's a great question. Good. And I was just about to say, and Kimothy, please add in anything. And I see that Kimothy did, which is theory of change is a specific type of methodology for planning, participation, and evaluation, which defines long-term goals. So I think that's a really nice explanation. And also just, right, I think, yeah, it's sort of a slightly different process. It could be helpful, but in terms of like the intensity of writing a grant proposal, I might just focus on what's in front of me first, and maybe as a next iteration, think about incorporating steps for creating a theory of change. As an add-on at some other time after you submit the grant. Any other questions?
Folks are also welcome to unmute your mic if you prefer to ask your question that way. All right. No other questions coming in. Just great presentation. Great job. Thank you. Lisa, if you could, yeah, just flip to this really quick. So we have 5 minutes to spare. We'll stick around if folks want to ask a few more questions, but for the purpose of the presentation, because this is a workshop series, we have 4 of them. If you have not registered for the other 2, one's tomorrow, one next Monday, we highly encourage you to. They're going to be great. Tomorrow is going to be focused on how to find evidence to support your program, and Monday on cultural humility. So we will have an evaluation form that's going out next Monday afternoon where you can share your feedback on all the workshops you attended. So as not to overwhelm folks every day with a different form, we will just be sending one out. So if you could please just keep that in mind, we would really, really appreciate your feedback. Awesome. So I'll close it here. I'm going to stop the recording, but feel free to stick around and ask a few more questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.